Hey there, welcome to my channel. My name is Dominique. In this corner of the internet, I talk about all things like cybersecurity, emerging technology, such as cloud security and artificial intelligence. I talk about personal growth, leadership, books, honestly, anything that I'm interested in at the moment. My goal is to provide you with the information for you to grow and succeed in whatever you want to do. And I'm on a mission to close the cybersecurity skills gap by teaching a million people. So if you want to grow your skills, be sure to like, subscribe, and comment. In today's video, I'll be walking you through a report that I use pretty commonly in leadership and as a practitioner that came out this summer. So every year, thousands, if not millions, because there's quite a few of us cybersecurity professionals, download the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report. Now, most people kind of read it like a newspaper, right? Or just kind of take the stats to look at trends. I don't do that, or at least that's not the only thing that I do, right? I like to read it as a strategic planning document, right? Because I wanted to inform how I make decisions, how I think about trends, how I do my work. So today I want to walk you through exactly how I use this report as a cybersecurity leader and how I'm using it now, right, as a consultant working with small and medium businesses. And this would be also helpful for you if you're working in a corporate organization. And I also want to explain why this report has become just one of the most valuable resources that I revisit every year because I remember. Early in my journey in cybersecurity, I was told about this report and to use it as just a way to build my knowledge. And I remember hearing it that it's a Verizon, that it was by the company Verizon, which I only associated with my phone, right? I didn't think of it in any other respect. And so I was pretty surprised to know that Verizon actually has a very in-depth research organization that has reports like this. So before I read anything, I'm actually going to pull it up on the screen and kind of share side by side. Before I read anything, especially a report as dense as this one. It's like 121 pages. I hesitate to dive into the numbers first, right? Like we're now getting into the thinking about how my methodology and how I read reports. Instead, I want to come up with some questions to inform about what I'm going to be reading and why. Some of those questions include what has changed in some of the trends that might pop up, right? Because this is a yearly report, which means they showcase the trends that are going up, the ones that are going down. I also care about what remains the same, right? Things that are not changing. I care about what decisions should this influence for me, right? And so, as an entrepreneur, as a consultant for small and medium sized businesses, I care about how I inform them of their strategy, right? And what the report tells me about their particular industry versus if you are a practitioner who is in corporate and perhaps you work in healthcare, perhaps you work in manufacturing, right? They break it out by industries in this report. That should help inform you about how you think about your own strategy. And then lastly, how does anything that I'm reading apply to my work today? So having these questions in mind before you start reading will help turn on that curiosity and critical thinking skill that is also important right now. And it can also apply to any report that you read. And so let's actually go through the report together and get me set up. Perfect. Okay, see, this is a problem with having like 1,000 screens. Okay, cool. So the first thing that we're going to walk through, if you want to find the data breach investigations report, you can always just go to verizon.com or go to Google and type in Verizon DBIR. It will always pop up, and then you can find the same report that I'm looking at now. But I'll also link it in the description box so that way you can kind of go right to it instead of having to search. But either way, it's helpful to learn how to search so that way next year or sometime in the future when you want to find it, it's easy to know how to go ahead and reference it. Okay, so this is the report. As I said, it's 121 pages. that is very intimidating. Don't feel like you need to go through all of it unless you are a person who likes to read like me. But even myself, right? Especially if when I was in corporate, I wasn't going through all 100 pages. But there were some key sections that I always go to that I want to show you today, so that way you can be informed about what you're looking for. And so this is going to be the report. When you scroll down to about the fourth page, it will give you a table of contents that will outline all of the different sections that you can check out. The first one that we are going to go to is methodology. That's going to be under Section 9, Appendix A. I already have it up, so I'm just going to pull it up. Now, the reason why I choose to go to Appendix A first for methodology is because it's helpful for me to understand where the data came from, right? This is a heavy, research dense report. And so I care about where the data came from, right? Because this data, the organizations, doesn't apply to me, right? Perhaps this is a report based out in Europe and I'm based here in the United States. It's helpful, but maybe not so much for my particular organization if we're regional, right? Methodology, this section is also helpful for understanding how incidents were classified. It gives you some information about sample size. It gives you some information about the contributors, the limitations, their process, right? It's important for you to understand with any report or information that you're using to inform, especially security strategy, about how they're doing it. Because you might be asked, right? What if you present this to leadership and they're like, okay, great. Can you let me know how did they like who is the sample size? Was it 1,000 organizations? Was it just 200 organizations, right? Because that's a very vast difference in terms of whether or not that information will be useful for you. And so I always go here first. It's helpful just to skim through, especially because they also call out some bias, which we all know is present in many things, AI included. And so this is just a helpful section for you to read up on. The next section we're going to get into is called the year in review and the key findings. So, year in review matters, or at least for me, because it is helpful to give. And let me see if I can zoom in just a bit more. It's helpful for me because it kind of shows me a month by month breakdown about what was happening or trending in the industry. And so, this in particular, I actually really enjoyed seeing the trends because for the first couple of months, you can see identity, right, has been the most prevalent topic, which is something that I had brought up in my newsletter. And so I'm happy to see it confirmed here that the way identity was shifting and this concept of the identity perimeter, meaning that if I take care of all of these controls regarding identity, which we think of like multi factor authentication or, as you can see, device code authentication. All of those adversaries were focusing on the identity for quite a long time because that is how they would get into your system. Think about your username and password. Think about, when organizations started to roll out, hey, you need two-factor authentication, or now we're in like a passwordless trend, right? Identity is huge because that is how that's one of the main most common vectors that attackers were able to get into a system. And if they were able to successfully get in, they can act as you and use that trust, right? As you as an employee, because you're already trusted by your organization, they can use that trust to do whatever, right? Either exfil information, perhaps try to gain an advantage and get more privilege. And so that way they can access more sensitive information. And so we can see in January and February that identity was pretty big. Then, as we get into the rest of the summer, I mean, the spring, sorry, not summer so far, you can see supply chain started to take some precedence, right? That supply chain fragility took center stage. And that also makes sense in trends, right? When you think about how interconnected we all are in this world, right? We can access systems that are based over in Europe or in Asia. We have companies that are now global, right? That rely on producers or manufacturers overseas. And so that chain of links between organizations and businesses are being exploited because I'll be honest, organizations haven't done a really great job of due diligence security wise when it comes to acquisitions or mergers or just trying to lower the cost of manufacturing things. And in doing so, now you've created risk down your supply chain because you're not applying the same level of rigor security wise to the rest of your supply chain as perhaps you are to just yourself or your critical vendors. And then for yourself, you can continue to go down this particular section to see the trends for the rest of the year that they've included. Now, and you also have to remember this is retrospective. And so this is going to be the prior year because clearly right now I'm recording this in July. And so August, September, October, November haven't even happened yet. And so always be mindful that this is a report that is looking backwards, and so you can expect that the rest of this year will be filled out for this report in 2027. Okay, the next section we're going to go to is key findings, which let me go ahead and pull that up. Okay, so from a key findings, key topics and findings section, you'll find that pretty early in the report. And what they'll do is they'll supply a high level overview of the top ways that attackers are exploiting or trying to get into systems or essentially just attacking in general, right? And so the first one that they highlight, which is very interesting to note, right, as part of any strategy discussions, is that the rise in vulnerability exploitation is now the most, let me, perfect, make it bigger, is now the most common initial access vector for breaches. And so, as I kind of just showed in the section before, identity used to be, or credentials used to be the easiest or the most common ways that attackers would get into your organization. But now it is the exploitation of vulnerabilities. And that is pretty big because they highlight that 31% of this year's reporting data set is the exploitation of vulnerabilities that it just essentially rose to 31%. Now, for me, I think this changes the conversation a little bit around asset inventory, which is always a big focus. They kind of tell you to focus and prioritize in the beginning of any security strategy, which is still important. It changes how you think about exposure management, your patching prioritization, which everyone has been, organizations have been throwing money, resources, people, processes, XYZ towards patching. And it also kind of highlights the external attack surface, right? That we have been putting all these resources, time, and people against it and has been focusing on patching faster. Right. I distinctly remember working at a company a couple years ago, and that was the only thing is how fast can we patch? And now we realize that this is still a problem and it's only getting worse. This report came out in June of 2026. I don't even think it includes the fact that Claude or Anthropic came out with Mythos, right? A security model, the AI model that is able to find and exploit vulnerabilities like at the speed of light, so to speak. And so I don't even know if that is taken into account in this report. I'm pretty sure it's not because Mythos has been limited in who can access it and who can use it. But I wouldn't be surprised if this number, the 31% that's highlighted here, is actually increasing by next year simply because of the capabilities that the AI models are now able to do when it comes to vulnerabilities. And if this particular data set is showing that despite putting millions of dollars, tons of people and resources towards this, that organizations are still having an issue, I think then the real question starts to become, right, what's happening with the organizations? Like, why isn't this getting better? And instead of patching faster, as a leader, I want to know like why organizations aren't able to close this gap despite throwing all this money on it. The next one I want to highlight is growth in ransomware and third party breaches, right? As you can see, the first statistics that they highlight is that ransomware grew again to 48% of all breaches, which is up 4%. Last year was 44%. What is interesting and which I'm excited about, right? Because ransomware has been steadily growing at least for the past 5+ years, if I've been kind of keeping up with reports and paying attention to statistics. Um, I love that ransomware payments have continued to decline because we were actually seeing an uptick. If I'm not mistaken, it was either last year or the year before. We were seeing an uptick in companies paying out the ransomware payments. And what is pretty terrible about this is that it will incentivize attackers to keep using ransomware against other organizations simply because they're getting the reward, right? Organizations perhaps don't have backups or they don't have resilient systems. And so, in order for them to get back online and not to be disruptive, they go ahead and pay the attackers. Doing so means that they'll probably come around again, or they can use the same tactic on another company. Unfortunately, this is a pretty common attack pattern for like the education system. I believe it was earlier this year that Canva, not the system in which you use to like design presentations. There is one for the education system where like you log in if you're in a university, for example, and you need to take an exam or you need to do your homework, like those kind of platforms had a ransomware attack. And it was when they had finals. And so they wind up having to navigate that pretty quickly because now it's causing such a disruption. And so instances like that is really sad to see, but I'm glad to see that at least there's a decline in payments, which hopefully means that attackers would be less incentivized to use that as a pattern. But it's still pretty prevalent because clearly it's here on the report, right? And so ransomware is definitely something that should be on your strategy or to when you're thinking about incident response, right? Or building resilient systems, ransomware should be one that you are preparing for. Next, let's move on to a couple of just the other sections they have highlighted here, which is that generative AI is impacting the threat landscape, something that should already be on the radar for every security practitioner because AI in general is impacting cybersecurity in a multitude of ways. One of the most common is generative AI and specifically used for social engineering. So think about maybe years, decades ago, when we thought of social engineering, we would see the emails, the text messages that had these errors, grammatical errors, so you can easily spot, like, hey, this is a scam, let me not click on it. But now, generative AI, as we can see from this report, has actually helped attackers get much better on catching those not only grammatical errors that we would be on the lookout for, that we would tell users like in security awareness training, like if you see errors or if you see a Gmail or if you see XYZ, they've fixed those. But now they've also gotten pretty tailored where they can scrape the internet and say, like, hey, you shop at Target a lot. Perhaps I should send you something that um, showcases that comes from Target. And that way you're more incentivized to want to click on it because you trust that brand a little bit more. And so I definitely think that's something to make note of, especially when it comes to mobiles. Everyone is on their phone. And so social engineering is not just limited to your email, it is also prevalent in your text messages and the phone calls that you get. Hell, even FaceTimes, I wouldn't be surprised about that. And so paying attention to how, especially if you are a practitioner that has a BYOD or bring your own device policy at work, this is definitely helpful for understanding that a little bit more. And the last one is going to be around shadow AI policy. Shadow AI is similar to, you would hear shadow IT, right? In terms of people would, or users at your company would install applications on their devices or perhaps in browsers that aren't approved, right? That might pose a security risk. And now the same is happening with AI tools and AI platforms where AI is embedded in so many of our uh, uh, popular websites, our popular tools, the way that we work. And so, if you don't have an understanding of those features that and what those features have access to, that poses a risk and increases significantly. All right. Next, I want to move on to industry reports. So, section 5 of this report, as you can see down in page 75, is breaking down this report by industry, which is amazing because it allows you to see what is happening across not just one industry, but a variety of industries, which is helpful for you. You can determine which industry you're in, and also, this might be helpful in learning what is another industry solving or not solving that perhaps you should be aware of. And then what attack patterns are happening across industries, because a lot of the times, like ransomware, for example, that's not just regulated for the education industry, it is anywhere. And so, this section, I'll scroll down a little bit. This section will throw a lot of data at you. Let me zoom in a bit. And so these numbers might confuse you when you first see it. I tend to scroll past it. They're helpful if you care about statistical data, if you want to see how they break things down. But really, what I think is more important, if I can scroll, is when you get to the actual industry, you can see it says agriculture, administrative, construction, and this will help you see how many incidents. They tell you the frequency of incidents, how many were confirmed with data disclosure. They'll tell you the top patterns, attack patterns. They'll tell you the threat actors, which is important, right? Because when you're thinking about security strategy and you're thinking about who would want to target our organization, what would be their motives, perhaps? What kind of data are they looking for? So, like, as you see with agriculture, 30%, 36% was some secrets, right? It is helpful to inform how you set up incident response. It is helpful to inform how you talk to your leadership about resources. It is helpful just to inform you in general about how you perhaps how the organization might be targeted, and then how you can prepare and become more resilient against it. And so they give a pretty in-depth breakdown by so many of these industries. And so this is a really helpful section for anyone to take a look at, so you can understand how your industry is being targeted, or if you are a professional who's looking to move or to make a pivot into industries. For example, I've been pretty interested in critical infrastructure recently. This will be a helpful section for me to understand, well, what's the frequency? What's the top attack patterns? So that way, when I start to have conversations with leaders in that space, or perhaps I'm doing interviews in that space, like I now have some information to help with that foundation. All right. Next, we're going to go into regional analysis. This is on page 99 of the report. Now, regional analysis is broken down exactly how it says, in terms of the attack patterns and the trends that are being witnessed across regions. And what's great about this for me is that as I worked with organizations looking to scale and grow, everyone wants to be a global business these days. And so while I live in the United States, most businesses are like, I've been with organizations who wanted to expand into the Asian market, who wanted to expand into EMEA or Europe. And so for myself, I ask, which attacks are increasing in which region? And then, are there different attack motivations that I should be aware of? And so, let's take an example of Europe for an example, because I'm working with an organization now over there. What would be helpful for me is to see there are 6,000 or a little bit over 6,000 confirmed data disclosure incidents. And overall, Europe had a little over 8,000 incidents in the past year. Now, they come into second compared to North America, which had 12,000, a little over 12,000 incidents, right, with 8,000 confirmed data disclosure. It's also helpful to see that each of these regions has system intrusion as a top attack pattern. This lets you know that no matter where you're working in, system intrusion is important to have as a incident response procedure or just to have in your um, plan for business resiliency. You can also go across the board to see the threat actors, right? The attacker's motivations. As we can see, financials always going to be getting that money, no matter where you are or who you are, is going to be right top priority for attackers. Can they get money out of this attack pattern that they're doing? It's also helpful to see what kind of data is being compromised, right? We have talked about credentials and how you can use credentials to either climb your way up the privilege ladder to see if you can get access to more sensitive information. Perhaps it's secrets they're looking for, intellectual property, things of that nature. So, this is just a helpful section overall for you to deep dive into. Next, I'm going to go into the executive summary, which is actually a separate report, still about the same, still for 2026, still from Verizon, but they have a full comprehensive report, which is the 121 report that I just went through, but they also have an executive summary. Now, the reason why I also look at the executive summary is because I look at this as a comparison to the full report. It will teach you something about executive communication, especially for those who want to get into leadership or perhaps are early in their leadership journey and want to climb the ladder towards more senior leadership roles. This is helpful for you to review because it will show you what got removed from the big 121 report to this report. It will also show you what stayed and why. And that's important for you to understand as you're trying to, yeah, the need to tailor your audience when you are what you present to your team, for example, of analysts, will be very different from what you might present to your manager, which would be very different from what you might present to the CEO of a company, right? And so this executive report is helpful for that latter half, the CEO, the C suite, the senior leadership who, to be honest, don't care about the way that the industries have broken down. They don't care about education. If you work in healthcare, they don't care about, the attack patterns happening over in the educational standpoint. But for you, this would be helpful. The executive summary would be helpful to say, okay, cool. Here's what I want to highlight, right? Like as you can see, they have the top for the past 3 years, they highlight the top attack patterns, and they show you and break down so you can see the trends. And so this might be a helpful graphic right here to take a screenshot of to say like, hey, as you can see year over year, system intrusion has been climbing from 36% in 2024 to 61% in 2026. This is helpful for me in order to know what resources or what priorities that I should be um, building my roadmap around to say, hey, this affects our organization. This will affect our business resiliency, our operations, and so this is where I need resources, right? Or this is where I need to map out a new team to put some focus on. The last section I want to focus on is Appendix C, which is about using this report for security risk decisions. Now, I love that they included this section because Appendix C focuses on, rather than just consuming statistics, it is a helpful reminder that reports don't improve security. decisions improve security? And remember, this report is not about just consuming information for the sake of it. It's how do I use this information to inform the decisions I'm making towards my own security strategy and lowering risk. And so, as you can see here, if you go through this section, it will give you a breakdown of understanding the statistics. It's helpful for realizing how do I use this report as your baseline, right? And as I mentioned before, because it's broken down by industry, it's broken down by size and region, right? It is really helpful to use this as a baseline for your own industry, for your own security strategy, to help you understand, like, are you even meeting? Do you have the controls that are currently being exploited in your industry? Do you have an understanding of your own baseline and limitations and what you can do about it? What this report can help you kind of focus and prioritize for the next couple of quarters. And it's also helpful to do a comparison, right? I love that they highlight, using your own history, right? You should have a strong evidence base, right? And by evidence base, I mean, hey, how are you implementing your policies? Like, what kind of policies do you have? What controls do you have to address things like ransomware, to address identity and access management challenges, to address vulnerabilities and patching? What is the processes that you have in place, especially when you see the trends about that they're highlighting where organizations clearly haven't prioritized those controls and how you can do a little bit better. It also gives you some information about, what attackers try to test when um, what attackers look for when they're testing you, and how some of the activities that you're doing can inform how you build a more resilient system. So, for example, pen test results, red team findings, bug bounty reports, whether or not you do any of those, which you should be at least doing pen test result reports, especially if you are under regulation, because frameworks like PCI require you to do them quarterly. Like, those should be information. They're just not activities for you to do for the sake of doing them. They should be giving you information about, hey, we found this particular vulnerability in our application for the past 3 quarters. That should probably be a priority for you, right? Or perhaps you opened a bug bounty because you don't have a huge team and a lot of resources. And so those who are um, you can invite external people to be a part of a bug bounty program who can find vulnerabilities for you in exchange for you giving them a payout, right? And so it just depends on the size of your organization, how much resources you have, and what you care about. But the overall gist of this section is helping you to be able to say, not just read this report for the sake of reading it and for stats, but how is it informing the decisions and things that I'm doing moving forward. Okay, before we end for today, I want to go over, what does this report and everything that I just went over change about your work today, tomorrow, and for the future. After you read this report, which I encourage you after watching this video to go read for yourself, what's helpful for you to ask yourself is, as an internal security leader, if you're a leader on your team or you're an aspiring leader, right? What would you brief your executives on? Which projects should you reprioritize based off of the trends that you read in this report? And what assumptions about trends or things in your own security environment should you revisit? If you're a consultant like myself, some of the questions that I'm even asking are, what conversations should I start having with my clients, right, to inform their own security strategy? Which assessments will become more valuable that I'm doing for them? And which services now become more important that I'm offering because of the trends that I might see in the industry that they're working in, or that is being forecasted from this report? And lastly, if you're someone who's building educational content, also such like myself, this should help inform, what should you teach people next, right? Based off of these trends and what we're seeing, it should inform your security awareness program. And so even if you're doing, maybe you're in charge of security awareness at your company, and like I said, I'm recording this in July of 2026, which means in October here in North America is the Security Awareness Month, right? This would be a great report for you to use to help inform what you're teaching your users during that month. what this does is it helps makes this report very actionable versus just something that you consume. Now, this report does not answer everything about the trends happening in cybersecurity. It is one piece of data that you can use, but it should be a piece of data along with other data sets or data points that will help inform your strategy over time. And every day, with the introduction of either a new AI model, hopefully we don't get anything crazier than my those, and other factors, there's usually more questions and answers that I leave with when I'm reading reports like this. And so here are some of the questions I have heading into the rest of this year. And I'm walking away wondering, are organization are organizations still measuring the wrong security metrics? Right? We tend to have metrics and want to measure everything. But because of the shifts that are happening recently, like, are those still the same ones and they're worth revisiting? Why is vulnerability management getting harder despite better tooling and being able to go faster? I'm also wondering, should GRC teams adapt to these changes? As we know, GRC is largely left behind. Security is largely left behind, but GRC teams are even more largely left behind. And so I definitely think that they should adapt their strategies, but it's more so of like how. Um, and then lastly, what does this mean for organizations that don't have mature security teams? Because there are tons of organizations, there are tons of cuts that has been made to the cybersecurity industry over the past year or two. We always know that security tends to be the first one to be let go when money is tight and organizations shift priorities. And so for those who are still fighting the good fight, how do you use this to better your strategy and get smarter? Right? To figure out how to be able to still move the needle forward, maybe despite not having all of the resources you once had. Now, this report doesn't tell me what to believe. It definitely gives me better questions to ask. It definitely gives me a really great foundation about how I think about trends moving forward for the rest of the year and going into 2027. And so every year that I read this report, it kind of helps me. I leave a bit clearer on where the industry is moving, some of the assumptions I had at the beginning of the year, because I came out with I think in January, either December, I came out with like the trends I predict that is going to happen for the year. And so this is a helpful report that helps me either validate some of those trends that I was predicting or helps me correct some of those assumptions. But it also informs me on how I should focus my time. And so that's why I keep coming back to it. I hope you keep coming back to it as well. I'll definitely be able to do this year after year and kind of show you what I'm thinking about and highlight some of the statistics that come out from this report. And so I hope this helped you in your understanding of how to read the Verizon Database Investigations report and any other report that you come across. If you did read it, what surprised you? And what questions do you have? What questions maybe were answered for you that you didn't know or didn't know how to find the answers for? I would definitely love to hear more about it. Please leave it in the comments below. I will see you next time.